It's been a popular saying in the digital age that if something comes for free, then you are the product. It's something that has probably been said for ages when it comes to product as service or anything as service mindset when it comes to our digital age of applications, social media sites, and the rest. One of the things about that particularly sticks out to me is how often that has just been tacitly accepted by most people. We know that our data is being tracked. We know that the things that we say near and around our phones will later be used as advertising for the average person, and it happens to all of us. Even I, who is somewhat privacy savvy about making sure that personalized advertisements are off and I just see everything else, alongside trying to use VPNs and things like that when browsing or engaging on the high seas, I still get advertising for things I talk about in my real life. I have more advertisements in my personal email inbox about my upcoming wedding and how to plan for it and things like that, more than I would like to be comfortable with acknowledging. But when it comes to the issues of, say, social media or our online political ecosystems, the same thing very much takes place. We all engage in platforms wherein our understanding of reality is not as, objectively observable as we once thought it would be. We all live in sort of these parafictional environments where we blur the line between fact and anything that could be possibly made up for our own enjoyment. After all, when we engage in politics, we are engaging in the ideas and political formulas therein, and not every political formula is going to be based in reality. Facts and figures will be distorted. Our personal biases, whether by blood, ideology, religion, faith, etc., are all going to play this very large role in how we engage politically. This is very basic stuff. Everyone sort of knows that this is to be true. Yet, when we look at how things are, let's say, on example, on Twitter, and Twitter is really going to be the main thing I talk about today. Forgive me if this video sounds rather meta and I'm just ranting into my microphone, but these are sort of things that have been stuck in my craw now for the last 3 or 4 months, and I've been trying to get them out. Consider this sort of a preview to a longer essay that will hopefully drop before the end of the month on Substack. One of the things that really sticks out to me has been this wonderful intersection between large language learning models, and of course, at the time of this recording, Grok on Twitter has had a lovely moment that reminds me of Tay, Microsoft's little AI chatbot from about 10 years ago. But also, alongside with LLMs, Grok, and others, has been this recurring theme about how individuals are having these sort of intimate, romantic experiences with ChatGPT and other bots just like it. You can go online and look up companionship bots or things that are a little more not safe for work, and you realize that the brown glass bottle that so many beetles have been confusing for a female mate is very much here. In fact, I saw a tweet that went rather viral because it ended up on my timeline, where an individual was on the New York subway and he was texting ChatGPT as if it was his girlfriend, with the reassurances that someone was there for him and that he's got this babe. Very strange, to be saying the least, and I feel as if once again my review that I put out about a year or so ago on the 2013 movie Her has aged very well. That film feels very much ahead of its time, and people are trying to take that film and very much make it a reality. But this intersects with politics perfectly, because after all, we live in an age now where truth is this very hard thing to find. I don't think that we're entirely in a post-truth world, in part because the sacred and the divine hasn't been completely removed, no matter how hard people try to remove it. After all, no one is going to be able to get rid of God, no matter how many times they claim to have killed him, and people will always be searching for rituals and engaging in some kind of liturgical calendar, whether it's secular or otherwise. Man is indeed a religious animal, it just entirely depends on what you, yourself, wish to acknowledge and worship. Plenty of people these days are idolaters, and if the 2020 Summer of Love riots weren't any other example of that, well then consider the things that we consider ritual in our own lives day to day. But back to politics for a moment. I guess that's the thing that people really come here for now, isn't it? I have been engaging in this sort of thought process about how, because products, of course, they're free. Social media is free. Twitter, yes, you can pay for premium. You can engage in the monetization aspect of Twitter, and that can certainly be fun. I've had a few viral tweets lately, and I definitely understand the appeal of creating a slot posting account for memes or cute animals or just reposting other people's images and tweets out of context for the sake of making a quick buck. A couple of extra $100 a month certainly doesn't hurt when you're doing the bare minimum effort possible. It is the closest thing that the average person has, outside of investment banking, I suppose, for money for nothing. But when we engage in these platforms where we ourselves are the product, we now engage algorithmically, we all get filtered, we all get assigned into various parts and parcels for how we choose to engage in the platform. Are you a lurker? Are you a poster? Are you a reply guy? We sort of get categorized into a myriad of political positions, as well as what type of poster or user we are. And in doing so, we find parts of our personality can easily be shaved off. My friend Christopher Sandbach has talked about this in the dimensionalization process. Parts of our personalities and who we are as actual individuals get shaved off or cut away so we can fit inside these easily manageable boxes that become stereotypical archetypes for what we see online. Individuals could be perhaps interesting at first, but the name of the game when it comes to content creation, engagement bait, and so on allows us to shave off certain unique quirks of our personality that may not necessarily be able to help us make money or get views, and no one wants to see us complain about what's going on in our day-to-day life. So what do? Well, simple. You fit inside of a pretty little box that says, well, this is the stereotypical definition of e-girl. You can try to modify that if you so wish, and good luck out there as you try to get attention, OnlyFans, etc., whatever you want to do with that particular account. At the same time, politically speaking, you find yourself in a really interesting position because you can sort of use network mapping, and your brain already does this for you, although if I were sort of an evil researcher, I would definitely be doing something similar, where I would be using various linguistic terminology and phraseology to map certain groups and ideas. And of course, in these marketplace of ideas, which really isn't a marketplace, it's more as if we're at a car show and various manufacturers, models, and makes are all out there trying to advertise their best terminology, their best new model for 2025. The Trump administration has a variety of terms. The most popular one right now is pannequin. Those that are the inverse, are opposite of plan trusters. It's very interesting how we've recreated plan trusting and Q, but now it just happens to work out because the president is in the White House and it happens to be your guy. But when we use certain terms, it's also really hard to understand where did they come from, because so much of our timeline on Twitter, and this again is reiterating the obvious, but I think it bears worth repeating, that it's all happening behind the scenes in group chats. The timeline, has been told to me, is nothing more than the auditioning stage to be added to various group chats, where you agree and amplify and try to manipulate so that your content, your views, your ideas, your products get seen all the time. And this means, of course, kicking anyone out that is not going to be on board with your message 100%. And they can turn into petty, ugly, and very feminine spaces, despite their own complaints of the longhouse. Every group chat, in turn, can become a longhouse if they so wish to run it like that. And boy, oh boy, do some people do. However, this also makes it really difficult for the average person to determine where did a certain meme, a certain inflection point, a certain talking point about a particular issue come from. After all, when we're using these linguistic mapping tools, this allows us very quickly to identify which groups are with which individuals or personality cults that get formulated as a form of leadership. Hierarchy, of course, is going to inevitably be created, and certain posters with large followings and certain accounts are going to be heard and seen by anyone present who wants to make sure that their voice gets heard. And of course, if the work is good, it will naturally be rewarded by leadership, by readership, as well as with money and the potentiality to be published in some places. We all engage in this game, myself included. I'm nowhere near innocent of this at all. I'm not even trying to indict it for moral reasons. It's just this important factor when navigating politically. And because our timelines inevitably skew reality, and we see this for both the left and the right. The left will tell you all the time that reality has a liberal bias, except their bias is to ignore very obvious patterns that you and I can recognize when it comes to the issues of lobbyists, foreign interests, money, crime, IQ, statistics, whatever you really want to dive into. The world is your mathematical oyster. On the right, however, they'll tell you that the right has always been historically correct, and that we live in a world wherein liberalism has obviously jilted our understanding of how the world actually operates, and that we engage in a far more theocratic society than we have ever before in the name of secularism and liberalism, but we're obviously paying these pious and almost idolatrous levels of religious fervor towards the outgroup, and that we have this thanatophilic desire of death, and that we're aroused and excited by it as a society because we're so focused on the eschaton. Whether it be about climate change, the destruction of a European ancestral white America when it comes to immigration, the destruction of religion and culture, particularly Christianity in the West, it all comes to a head. And so for the average person trying to navigate these things, as I mentioned at the beginning, most of us live in a parafictional war space, the theater of war for narrative, truth, power that may not necessarily be 100% accurate. And so coming to terms with that fact allows us to see how individuals react online. This is where parafictional battle spaces create all these sort of groups where they're now increasingly parapolitical. That if obviously these are the narratives being put out by people, they are followed by such and such groups, my own rudimentary network mapping and pattern noticing tells me that this guy might be being paid off by someone. And in fact, he's going to be part of this camp that doesn't really align with my values because he always attacks me for my position, or he groups me in with people that he thinks are low IQ, non-white, or right-wing, communist, leftist, etc. Again, this happens on all sides of the political spectrum at all times because we facilitate group dynamics in which we self-sort ourselves, but a lot of that self-sorting is done with the assistance of algorithms and what we see on our timeline based upon the people that we follow, and also, of course, those that engage in debate and the argumentation with their political foes on the internet. This allows this parapolitical paranoia wherein all of a sudden we're always wondering who is the shady people getting paid behind the scenes and why am I not necessarily in it. It creates this mini ordeal of civility where all of a sudden people who you think are either less intelligent than you or are somehow having the wrong position on some issue being constantly rewarded while you're sitting there in the background thinking, well, like, this is obviously incorrect, but I'm not the one who's getting paid. I'm not the one in the magazine. I'm not the one being rehabilitated, despite the fact that I knew some individual had the same views that I did just a few years ago. This creates a schizophrenic political environment where even though you may have various disagreements with your friends or even what's going on in the administration, your voice is effectively culled, and you don't have the opportunity to actually speak your mind, lest you find yourself outcast or exiled by the various groups and company that used to agree and amplify with your work at any given point in time. This sort of political meta space that we're in allows us now to only look on ourselves more inwardly. We're entirely focused on who is doing what. And if we were to look at this as from an outsider's perspective, I feel sometimes like I'm Jane Goodall, and I'm looking at various tribes of chimpanzees and monkeys and gorillas engaging in very literal warfare with one another, engaging in various shit-flinging and drive-bys for ratios and to ensure that they are standing up against the man, that they're rallying against the deep state, or, of course, and more likely, against feds, subversives, and foreign interests. It makes the ability to have genuine discourse relatively non-existent. That thing feels very dead, despite the best efforts of some of my friends and colleagues, of people you probably already follow, to do their best to still engage in debate and discourse with those that they may disagree with, or those in positions of higher authority, or at least with larger platforms than they do. Whether it's the usual amount of people on the right arguing against the logic and belief system of those in the Babylon Bee, or Dave the Distributist trying to do his best to argue with genuine leftists and credentialed academics, and it works out for him because he does have a PhD. Overall, however, it puts you in a very strange position where if you're new to this scene, or if you're somewhat aware of how the game gets played, you're having to play two games at once. One, where your content has to be boosted and seen by those around you, while at the same time, while you're trying to navigate these various spaces and networks, which again, I would reiterate that the best network that you can really have online is one that also exists in real life. One of my favorite things about the Old Glory Club and the people that make content with us is that I've had the pleasure of meeting everyone, and I would call them my personal friends. They're all very good people. You can't necessarily say that about strangers in the group chat, and if the recent ordeal with Douglas Mackey, and thankfully, of course, all of the things that he has endured have been thrown out by a recent court decision, illustrates that you may not necessarily know who is a good and rational actor behind the other side of the screen in the group chat. This is why you should always behave online like anything that you say or do will inevitably, and one day very much will, be read against you in a court of law. This isn't, of course, to warn about optics or tell you to cool off on the spiciness. No, that's not really what I'm getting at. But the point is that we are engaging in a space online where we simultaneously are screaming into a void of screams, trying to be heard, while at the same time we know that those around us may have megaphones and those trying to silence your voice on the basis that you may not necessarily be playing the same game of ball that they are. So this parafictional reality that we live in, where the truth is being skewed or stories are being told to us in the same framework that official government bulletins or things that we once took as gospel truth just a few decades ago, are of course now lies. We're now being compartmentalized and dimensionalized into various groups. Your ability to stay quote-unquote independent becomes all but impossible, because it's very easy for you to be put into various camps or ideologies or titles that we can use to dismiss our foes. The sort of auto-amputation of nuance, so I can just assume that you are an enemy. Oh, you are, a part of the government. You are alt-light 2.0. You are a Baptist. You are a Fuentes fan, or whatever. All these things become ways in which we can either label our foes, even though they may not necessarily be our enemies, into easy little dimensionalized camps to ignore ourselves and just go on with our business, or of course rally behind the troops in the group chat to ensure that you're the one that gets to ratio the enemy and not necessarily you. These group dynamics, of course, replace any schema of actual identity within ourselves, and authenticity then gets traded out for this performative authenticity that is anything further from authentic truth itself, but you have to maintain appearances for the sake of argument and for the sake of maintaining your income stream or your growth on Twitter and your engagement, because after all, now that things are being monetized, this is the game that you have to play. This parafictional, parapolitical, schizophrenic, and paranoid reality that we live in online has gotten dramatically worse, of course, since things are monetized. We want that engagement. We want to ensure that the payouts are very, very good for ourselves and our friends, not just our enemies. In fact, we'll do anything to ensure that they're reported or community noted. That way, they themselves don't get to reap the same financial benefits we do. In a hyper-gamified environment, the ability to seek truth and meaningful connection gets heavily diluted and muddled, and politics become homeopathic. We're given a small taste of what things actually are, a semblance of policy, a semblance of ideology, and that is now the homeopathic substitute for the whole thing that we need. This isn't to talk about homeopathic medicine or anything like that, but what it is meant to illustrate for all of us here is that in this gamified environment, small nuggets of what actually come to pass as politics, truth, intellectual influence, or being a, quote, thought leader, oftentimes is merely a drop in the bucket for what things actually are. Even now, as I look on my timeline, I wonder to myself, how many of these people do accuse me of being that? I see the same cattiness of being in a group chat where people constantly complain about people I might be mutuals with, and I wonder if they say the same thing behind my back for the sake of trying to make sure I don't get to be on the same team or game that they're on, or heaven forbid, the same payroll. I am only funded, for the record, by viewers like you. My YouTube channel is monetized, but I would prefer if you were to donate monthly on Subscribestar for the time being. God knows that YouTube monetization does not last forever. Over the last 5 years of being the Prudentialist online, I have taken a heavy interest and influence over media bias and how it influences our psychology as well as our political environment. While people like David McGowan may have wrote Programmed to Kill, I think when we engage in the social media game online, especially when it comes to engaging in politics, dialogue, discourse, or trying to dunk on our enemies online, we're engaging in this sort of tacit social contract, whether we will it or not. We have signed on board to where, if anything, we are programmed to post. Whether that posting is good or otherwise doesn't necessarily matter. What does matter is that we've been programmed. We're very good at it. We know how to do it. And if we play the game just well enough, we might be recruited. We might be paid. We might be carried on to some new space where we ourselves get to set new narratives and become the new intermediaries, the new Brokaws, the new Don Lemons of the world, wherein all of a sudden we are the voice of authority for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people working in government as well as the world who believe in us, whatever we might have to say, even though it may not necessarily be true, and heaven forbid, it may not always be original. But those are just the thoughts that I have for now. I do intend to flesh out and finish this essay before the month's end. But remember that. We are programmed to post. We are being cut off and dimensionalized into easily manipulated, algorithmically boosted positions and ideologies. And sometimes, for a lot of younger people, that becomes the only semblance of a schema identity that they do have. And when you attack it, whether it's a fandom of a particular media genre, or it's simply a political ideology or position, or most often than not, a political personality that you may agree with, you watch as they rile and get angry at themselves and you, and of course, engage in the same tribalistic behavior that would normally send people into a lynch mob frenzy just a century ago. The gamified political environment we live in is dangerous, not just because it affects our understanding of the world around us, but also because we are now in a higher level of social distrust and disunity. I don't know who's who online. We used to say on the internet no one really knows that you're a dog, but on the internet no one really knows whether or not you're an Indian, or being paid by a think tank, or working with a subversive group of individuals that may or may not have ties to the intelligence community. Overall, the spaces that we live in put us in a peculiarly dangerous position, wherein we are constantly paranoid, and if we do not have good psychosecurity and the ability to stay calm and to parse out things in an intelligent and meaningful manner of discerning what is truth and what is fiction, for most people, that ability is all but gone, or purposefully eroded by the powers that be. You are all programmed to post. I am programmed to post. But I do pray, and I certainly hope that myself and my audience have the intelligence and the wherewithal to sustain ourselves against such parapolitical, parafictional realities that make things look like the stories of the SCP Foundation far closer to reality than anything else. Memetics and cognitohazards are very much real. You engage with them on the timeline every single day. I'll see you all next time. And until then, stay strong, be mindful of what's out there, and be prudent, everyone. Take care.